Well, earlier my colleague Sohail Rahman spoke to Mads Gilbert, a Norwegian doctor who's worked in hospitals in Gaza, and his contact with his colleagues there, he rejected Israel's accusations that Hamas uses hospitals for military purposes.
I have been walking around in these hospitals all over with my camera, documenting patients and the work during the crisis situations. I've been filming, picturing, talking to people. There has been no one door locked. I have never been controlled with my documentation. There has absolutely been not a single restriction in either of these two hospitals. I know the al-Quds hospital from the time it was built. And as you may know, there is a new medical block in the Shifa hospital under international surveillance. And during all these years, having worked in these two hospitals, I have never, ever traced any sign of any military or political command center. And if the Israelis, for these last 16 years, because they started these lies already in 2009, if they cannot provide any evidence or any proof, how can we look at this as anything else but the fog of war, the lies, and more importantly, the wishing of intimidating, scaring people, and getting excuses to bomb these important hospitals? And don't forget, these hospitals are cornerstones of the welfare and the healthcare for 2.2 million people. And when an army is allowed to threaten patients in a hospital and threaten to bomb it, when there is absolutely no evidence. And by the way, international law, the Geneva Convention, has 3 rules. It is proportionality, use the same amount of weapon as your enemy. It is precaution, don't hit civilian targets. And it is distinction. The precaution is that if a target is a mixed military-civilian target, the civilian interest takes priority over the military. So regardless, but turning back to your question, no, nor have I, nor have Dr. Erik or any other Norwegian healthcare workers who have been working with the Palestinian healthcare for more than 30 years. We have never seen any evidence. And had I seen it, I would not have worked there, because I live according to the Geneva Convention. So show us the proof.
That's Norwegian Dr. Mads Gilbert, who knows hospitals in Gaza very well. Let's take this on. We can speak now to Geoffrey Robertson, who's a former United Nations war crimes judge. Joins me live from London. And Mr. Robertson, you're very well acquainted through your work as a human rights barrister with assessing the horrors of war and the legalities of war, indeed. How do you view what is going on in Gaza right now?
Well, there's no question of how I view it. It's a question of how international law views it. And the answer is very clear. There is an absolute red line against bombing hospitals unless you can prove, and the burden is on the aggressor to prove, that they're being used as for military purposes. And prima facie is what lawyers say, on the face of it. The bombing of a hospital is a clear international crime. Of course, you can't avoid that by giving warnings. As the WHO said, a hospital that has patients, pregnant women and so forth, there's no doubt about this hospital having many of those, can't just evacuate without casualties, and patients will die and will be severely injured as a result. So what are we to do with a government, Mr. Netanyahu and his cabinet ministers? It seems to me that they are now open to indictment for this war crime.
Okay, before we move on to that, I want to come on to that in a second, Mr. Robertson.
Hamas,
forgive me for interrupting you. I want to come on to that in just a second.
This attack could also be indicted. But the Israeli ministers must realize that they face indictment, not only by the ICC, the prosecutor is rather busy with Mr. Putin at the moment, but anywhere they go in the world in years to come, because many nations have got universal jurisdiction laws, as they're called, and there will be attempts to arrest and put them on trial. And they will be convicted unless they can show that the hospital is a military target, that rockets are shot from there, that it harbors Hamas fighters or whatever. But that burden is on them. And so they are vulnerable if they go ahead with bombing this hospital today or tonight.
OK, Mr. Robertson, I'm hoping you can hear me OK. I just wanted to clear one thing up. So if there are Hamas operatives underneath the hospitals, is the hospital a legitimate target, given that there are, I think, something like 14,000 people sheltering there and 400 patients?
Well, that's what lawyers are like, or judges are likely to call disproportionate. But it is clearly an argument. It's certainly an argument for going in with soldiers and securing the hospital without hurting the patients, and maybe and digging underneath it to see what can be found if you've got a reasonable apprehension that there are military targets underneath. But I would have thought that it's difficult to argue that you should bomb the hospital as such would do anything to alleviate that problem. So again, the burden is on the Israeli government to show that the attack is proportionate to the threat.
What is the process of bringing people that you're alluding to just now, of bringing people to justice? And is it ever likely to happen, given the warm embrace of Israel's actions by the United States?
Well, that is the big question, of course, as to the enforceability of international law. In my view, there is a basis for the ICC to take action, the International Criminal Court, and it would have the power to indict the leaders of Hamas who are guilty. Let's actually accept that, of giving the most horrible orders to their soldiers, so to speak, to kill not just Israeli soldiers, but citizens, and who were wickedly despoiled on October the 7th. But two wrongs don't make a right. And the Israeli government must be careful not itself to commit war crimes, because not only could it be prosecuted at the ICC, it doesn't accept the ICC, regrettably, so it's not, it can claim not to be bound by it. But it does pretend to comply with international law. And if it doesn't, by bombing hospitals without military justification, then its members, the people of the war cabinet, Mr. Netanyahu and his ministers, could be prosecuted in years to come in those countries which permit international jurisdiction, and will undoubtedly levy prosecutions against them if they visit. And so that's something they have to bear in mind.
Geoffrey Robertson, we appreciate your analysis and expertise. That's Geoffrey Robertson, a former United Nations war crimes judge. Thank you.